Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction and for the invitation to come to this place. I hope you won't regret it and that you can profit from my presence here. I'm going to speak about a difficult subject, the idea of culture, the concept of culture. But before I start with my topic, can you hear me? The microphone is perfect, fine. Before I start with my topic, let me say something about what philosophers do so that you don't get disappointed. If you want to enlarge your informational basis on any subject, if you want to enlarge empirically your knowledge, then you should not consult philosophers. Philosophers are not responsible for that and are not especially competent for empirical knowledge. But if you want to understand how certain concepts are used, then it could be sensible to ask a philosopher or to talk to a philosopher. Philosophers have concentrated in the history of Western philosophy their thinking activity on two tasks. They've been clarifying concepts for a long while. If you read Plato, the different dialogues, you will see Plato speaks about beauty, about the good life, about justice, quite difficult concepts, and he tries in a dialogue to find out how we should understand or conceive of those concepts. That would be the first task and the most important task for our meeting here, for our lecture. The second task philosophers are good at, or they should be good at, would be the task of critically assessing the validity and the strength of arguments we propose when we want to defend opinions or practical recommendations. Sometimes we recommend something and then we put forward an argument, and philosophers are sensitive concerning the validity and the strength of arguments. I think this second task is not going to be important for us. The first task is going to be more important for us. So, my subject matter, culture, cultural matters. If you ask, how do philosophers realize their task of clarifying concepts? My answer would be a simple answer. They make distinctions. And concerning the concept we have to clarify today, I think it is important to make a substantial distinction, a distinction between contents, the material idea of culture as a series of certain things, contents of culture, and the formal aspect of culture. We can consider everything to be culture, and then we could have a look at religions as orientation systems, but we would see them not as religions, but as cultural systems of orientation. So it is important to distinguish a material idea of culture and a practical or formal idea of culture. I am going to give you the structure of my talk so that you can't accuse me of not being systematic. If you have this paper, I haven't elaborated such a wonderful announcement, I wouldn't have been able to produce such a thing, but therefore allow me to give you. So the first distinction would be to say the first word you find on the paper is a Latin word, materialiter. Scholastic people used to distinguish the contents aspect of a problem using that word materialiter, and the other one would be formaliter. The translation would be formally and materially considered. Perhaps you speak French, and you know that French people have used a couple of concepts to refer to culture. They speak about civilisation, and they speak about Kultur. German people have got two, in the German language, there are two concepts too, Zivilisation and Kultur. But if we start with these these four concepts historically, we will see that there is a broad concept of culture and a narrow concept of culture. When French people speak about civilisation, they mean science, they mean technology, but they mean also the fine arts. And when they use the word culture, they refer only to the fine arts. The German use of the word Kultur would be a different one. Civilization has something to do with the technological or scientific development, in modern times fundamental, but culture is something more. It is not restricted, or it is not concentrated on the fine arts. Culture is something more. Culture has something to do with reason and not only with understanding. Culture would be the large concept, the wide concept that includes civilization. I think this is important because the dilemma of a cultural scientist is how to define the idea of culture, either in a broad or wide sense, so that culture integrates everything, every possible thing, or in a narrow sense, limiting the concept of culture to certain spheres, to the fine arts, or to higher culture. There have been many turns, materialistic turns in cultural theory, so that we have learned not to conceive of culture in a narrow sense. My idea would be to say that culture, and this is the way many people determine the concept, is a set or a class or a series of ways of thinking and ways of doing things. But you see, that is quite vague. People have beliefs about many things, and those beliefs would be what I call here ways of thinking, and they do different things. They apply certain techniques in their daily lives or when they organize political institutions. So a culture would be a series of ways of thinking and of doing things. That is not precise enough. We need a better definition of a concept which is complex. William Whewell, a British philosopher, spoke about colligation concepts. And colligation concepts are concepts we use to put together many heterogeneous things without being able to define them. For instance, if you go to Italy and have a look at different churches and buildings or different paintings and then come back to Germany and you are asked, what have you been doing in Italy? You could say, well, I've been studying the Renaissance. But you haven't met the Renaissance in nowhere, because you have been observing or watching certain paintings, individual churches, but you put all those things together under the colligation concept of Renaissance or Baroque, or when you speak about, for instance, the German Enlightenment or the French Enlightenment or the British Enlightenment, you put many authors together, many texts together, which are quite divergent and quite heterogeneous under a colligation concept. So if you define culture as a series of ways of thinking and of doing things, that would be a very vague and not precise enough concept. That would be a colligation concept that cannot satisfy the philosopher who tends to operate with this concept. We can say something about culture, and then we'll try to define it, or just to elaborate an understanding that could be defended or could be rationally justified. Those ways of thinking and those ways of doing things are transmitted. They pass from generation to generation. Children are socialized. They learn to believe something. They learn to do certain things in a specific way. They learn to estimate or appreciate certain phenomena and to detest others. They learn to evaluate what they experience in a specific way. So culture, whatever that is, a collective set of ways of thinking and of doing things, is transmitted through different mechanisms. Through imitation, remember, well, it is important to mention here the work of a French sociologist, Gabriel Tarde, who wrote on the imitation process, which is fundamental in society. If you don't know how to proceed, you have a look at the way people proceed, and then you imitate those people, and then you get integrated into the group. Through imitation, through education, through socialization, and through learning and teaching, culture is transmitted as a series of beliefs and ways of doing things. But what is specifically, or what is precisely transmitted? Let me introduce an idea that may seem difficult and that can be criticized, but which seems sensible to bring precision in what I am saying. I would propose to speak about memes as the cultural units, the smallest informational unit concerning culture. So if you have a belief, then you can call that belief a meme, a descriptive meme. If you have a way of doing things, for instance, a way of preparing coffee in the morning, or of drinking tea in the morning, or of having breakfast, you see, my concept of culture is not a very sophisticated one. It's not concentrated on higher spheres. It has something to do with the way we live, with the way we organize our lives. If you prepare coffee in a certain way, if you have dinner at a certain time in the evening or later, if you have holidays in this or that way, then all those things can be interpreted as practical memes. So you would have descriptive or theoretical, propositional or epistemic memes, however you want to call them. Using the concept of a meme, we refer to the beliefs. Then you would have practical memes, and then you would have evaluative memes. Memes, that means ways of saying things. Perhaps you approve, you don't approve the practice of lying, or you don't approve the practice of not paying taxes. You approve the practice of paying taxes because you have a certain idea of what a commonwealth is, or a society is, and how a distributive system should work that creates or makes possible social justice. So culture, not being very specific, could be defined as a system of ways of thinking and ways of acting. But if we want to be more precise, perhaps the idea of a meme would help us to individuate the cultural items that we transmit. So materially considered, culture would be a series of facts. And I've written a formula there so that you can, try to interpret it and try to apply it to reality. The culture of a person, of a specific person, X, or a specific nation, or a specific group, would be all the memes accepted or adopted by that person at a specific time, T. And that formula, that mathematical formula, should not be understood in a static way, but in a dynamical way. So if you ask what is German culture, that is going to be very difficult. That's speculative. Hegel wrote many things about German culture, about a culture of Vernunft. Fichte wrote about a culture of Vernunft, to be distinguished from the French culture, or from the British culture, or from the culture of Enlightenment, which were cultures of critique and understanding. But that is too speculative. But it is quite easy to find out which are the cultural preferences of an individual at a specific term. Those cultural preferences would be his beliefs, his epistemic attitudes, what he believes. Perhaps he's a religious person and he believes in God, and in a specifically conceived divinity. That would enter into the category of a descriptive or epistemic meme. Epistemic means concerning beliefs, or propositional meme. That person could, for instance, drive a car, or go from or drive from his home to the university, or to the working place. That would be a technique of going around that he applies. That person would be a car driver. So you would be able to, in a specific way, say in a definite way, to say what the cultural preferences of a person are. And if you add many cultural preferences, then you will find out that in some regions there are certain cultural patterns as a series or sets of memes accepted and adopted in those regions. But be careful, because if you take high institutional, entities, it is going to be very difficult to say, for instance, what is European? What is European? The idea of Europe, there have been many philosophers who have tried to say what European is. They have said, well, to be European is to be based or to have Christian roots. But imagine, what is Christianity? Do you refer to Jewish Christianity, to the Hellenized Christianity, to the Middle Ages and the way theology was then there, or to an enlightened Christendom? It is quite difficult to say what Christianity would be as a cultural orientation pattern. But realizing a subtle work of distinction, or a subtle thinking way of distinction, then you would arrive at perhaps at the qualitative units that would operationalize such concepts, which are quite difficult. The examples you find in the literature are quite easy. Eating rice with sticks and eating rice with a fork. That would be a meme. You see, but memes do not exist in reality simply like that. We must interpret what there is there and construct out of what there is there the cultural memes that we need in order to understand something. This is not, epistemically speaking or epistemologically speaking, this is not a plea for constructivism. I'm a realist, but cultural facts do not exist per se. They exist on the basis of what there is as interpretative products or unities of convenience that we construct. One important feature of memes is that they are not events, single events, but they are types. In analytic philosophy, we tend to distinguish types and tokens. Tokens are instantiations or examples of a certain thing. For instance, going out for a walk, that would be a type of activity that we could realize, and the walk we realize on a specific day, on a specific afternoon, a Sunday, for instance, that would be an instantiation or an exemplification of a type. And memes, I would conceive them not as single events, as particulars existing empirically in reality, but as types that can be realized at different moments. So my formula would be M of x at t. You can, in the discussion or in the conversation that we will have after the talk, object to that formula in case you have something to object. And I would propose to understand that formula in a dynamic sense, because the memes interact with each other, but I can't say how they interact. It would be a matter of bringing some examples of memes, and seeing how those evaluative, practical, and descriptive memes interact with each other, with one another, sorry. There is another problem that is important when we speak about culture, the problem of cultural change. There are cultures tend to be conservative. We can't say where they start and where they finish, where is the beginning of a culture, where are the demarcation lines in a precise way, but using the concept of a meme, we could get more precision into this task of delimiting the single cultures. Cultures tend to be conservative, but there is a change and there is evolution, because certain memes disappear and other memes get in. People start to smoke in a certain region or to use certain technical devices that were not used till that moment, and there is a cultural change because new memes are accepted, or new memes are transmitted from one culture to the other, or new memes due to a process of diffusion get into the social contexts which are relevant. So even if there is a conservatism in cultural matters, there is also change, and the change must be always specified according to the independence from the things, from the phenomena that we analyze. Fast food would be a meme, smoking would be a meme, and in a global world we see that there is homogenization and uniformity, because certain memes are transmitted to every culture, get diffused, and get integrated in every culture, but at the same time there is a phenomenon of isolation, encapsulation, fragmentation, and regionalization. So when we speak about cultural matters, we must be very prudent, because there is diffusion, emergence of new memes, diffusion of those memes, but at the same time rejection of certain memes and isolation, and we have to think about both sides. The most important question for people who are citizens of the world, who move from one country to the other, is the question of assessing and evaluating the cultural memes. We can recognize them, individuate them, interpret them, but the problem is always, how do we assess them? Is smoking a good meme or a bad meme? Is to be religious or to do this or that, to act according to a certain ritual, a good thing or a bad thing? Let me say something about commensurability and non-commensurability of memes. There are certain memes that can be compared with each other, and we can say that one meme is better than the other. If you want to cut things, I think it is better to use metal knives than to use wooden knives or stone knives. That's evident. If you have in mind a specific cutting function, then it is better to use certain knives that have certain properties. But it would be silly to compare popular dances trying to find out which is the best one or which is the better one. Or it would be silly to compare national anthems, to say, well, that anthem is better and that anthem. So in general terms, perhaps you can concentrate on the quality of the music and on the text of the contents transported by the, but one anthem is as good as the other, I would say, and the same thing happens with dialects. What is better, Basque or Catalan? Linguistically speaking, perhaps you could establish differences, and perhaps you could say the English language is better than other languages because it uses more verbal phrases and less nouns, and that tends to be better for thinking processes. The predication function is realized in this or that way, but normally you should not compare French and German and trying to find out which is the better language. French may be easier to learn, or German may be more complicated or more rigid, but both languages are good enough. And ways of eating, they are not commensurable. But there are other things that are commensurable. For instance, if you want to record music, then it is better to use a CD than an old record, although to have old records could be a sign of distinction. And if you want to avoid pregnancies, then it is better to take pills or use condoms than to eat a frog. So, depending on the function, you see sometimes in English-speaking countries, people like humor. At the technical university, it's quite difficult to make a joke because the jokes are bad and the people don't know how to cope with them. So good.
Oh, thank you.
I wanted to go on, but I could finish in I've learned. Just give me 3 minutes, and then I'll enjoy answering your questions and not being able to answer them. So the definition at the end of the first part, you've got it in there. Sorry, where is the paper? The definition would be, what is culture? Materially considered, then I would say culture is a whole of memes, descriptive, evaluative, and practical memes. And if you want to study specific culture, you have to elaborate thick descriptions, thick and thin, thick descriptions, concrete descriptions of the different memes that are combined in a specific cultural setting, and then you would get the thick description that will bring you to the grasping, to the conceptual grasping of the culture. If you want to think concretely about cultures. And imagine, well, remember what Hegel said, in philosophy we try to think concretely. We try to put every variable involved in a specific constellation together in order to grasp the situation. A common sense man thinks abstractly. That was the definition of Hegel, because he abstracts from many things. Philosophers tend to bring many things together, many aspects together, put them together, and show how they are articulated, and therefore they try to think concretely, in a concrete way. Concerning cultural matters, just 2 minutes. There is a distinction. There is the ethic and the emic perspective. The emic perspective is the insider perspective. You know what you are doing. You know how interpret the things you are doing. The ethic perspective would be the outsider perspective. So considering, or if you study cultural settings, you should adopt both perspectives. Perhaps you walk past in a house and you see a man digging a hole in the ground, and you don't know what that person is doing. Why? Because you don't know how he is interpreting what he is doing. He may be planting potatoes, or doing some physical exercise, or preventing a second heart attack, or doing a favor to his wife who told him, bring the garden in order, or into order, a typical German expression. So you see a man digging a hole. That would be the ethic perspective. In order to see what he is doing, you must understand how he interprets and how he understands himself while doing what he is doing. So you must adopt the emic perspective, which is necessary if you want to understand what cultural matters are. Let me come to the last point so that you can ask your question, the formal to the formal thing. Materially considered, culture is a series of facts, contents, descriptive, practical, and evaluative means. Some of them can be compared with each other, others cannot be compared with. It is important to adopt a perspective from outside and a perspective from inside, the ethic and the emic perspective. Formally speaking, culture is a way of looking at things. And because of this, the problem, the subject matter gets complicated, because everything can be a cultural object. Science, technology, religion, economy, the law system of a certain country, for instance, continental law or case law, the politics, morals, the norms, values, and habits accepted by the people can become a subject matter for culture, because we do not consider them as normative structures, but as interesting cultural things to be studied. How interesting would be the reaction that you pray like that? How interesting that you put people into prisons because of that? How interesting that you have such a scientific system or technological system. How interesting that your economic system operates with these laws and not with those laws. So you see, culture could become a perspective to have a look at everything imaginable, and therefore is the cultural subject a difficult one. Thank you very much for having been so patient and having given me your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Should I pronounce it Gil?
Yes.
For your lecture. My name is Gustavo. I think everyone here knows me. I'm a student from the University of Toronto, senior.
Toronto.
I'm from Peru. And so the question is, first, let me make a comment. So some people say that we should all respect other people's cultures. I agree. And if some people are doing this activity, doesn't matter, maybe whether it's moral or immoral, it's part of their culture, so it's okay. I would think, maybe it's a little controversial, that sure, there's some things that are morally, I would say, neutral, right? This culture likes to play with the guitar, this culture likes to play with the flute. But maybe there's some actions that do overlap with ethical questions, you know? Maybe this culture, cannibalism, this other culture, maybe genital mutilation. And so, I'm gonna ask you what you think at the end, but say in international development projects, I think sometimes it's discussed, or sometimes people not bother, but accuse these organizations of going to other people and trying to change people's cultures. And I would think if you evaluate it and there is a moral, justifiable reason why you should intervene in some act, it's okay, right? So the question then would be, yeah, what do you think? Do you agree? I think this makes sense, right?
Well, I think two important dimensions. First of all, it is important to understand what happens, why certain practices are established or function well, to understand. As Spinoza told, before you start condemning anything, you should understand how that phenomenon functions, what effects that specific phenomenon generate, and are they good, are they bad, are they beneficial, are they not? This would not imply that we should not criticize anything. The second aspect, or the second dimension, would be the critical assessment. And sometimes we have to condemn certain practices. But it is quite difficult. Condemning certain practices, it presupposes a finer strategy of proceeding. You can come from outside and say, well, Immanuel Kant or David Hume or Aristotle or Plato said that we should do this or that, and that such a practice would be a non-moral practice. In certain contexts, such an argument would be a good argument. But I've been teaching in Turkish universities, and in Turkish universities, Aristotle and Hume are well known, but they are not such authorities. So it is important, if you want to criticize something, Michael Walzer said that, to use the language of the specific culture in which, or the different discourses, try to activate different critical discourses of that culture, in which the practices were criticized from inside, so that it is easier for you to propose alternatives. So first of all, be patient and try to understand what you want to criticize. The maxim proposed by Spinoza. Try to understand and then condemn. And second, it is evident certain practices we cannot admit, we would not admit them. Every, Scanlon uses sorry that I quote American people, but I am being socialized in a specific part of the world, and that has drawbacks. So Scanlon said, certain things cannot be tolerated by any reasonable person, or certain things must be accepted by every reasonable, independent from which culture that person comes. But it would be nice if, for instance, if you get into Buddhism, if you get into the different philosophies which are not, or belief systems which are not Occidental, and try to see how in those systems basis for critique exist that you could activate for your critical assessment practice. So that would be my intuition.
Hello.
Yeah.
My name is Claire Princess Ayiloto, but many people call me Princess. And I'm from France. I'm a writer and a feminist activist. And at the moment, I'm a research graduate at the London Metropolitan University. Actually, I'm on women and child abuse. Actually, there's an ongoing problems at the London Metropolitan now. The argument actually is about most of these immigrants that are coming from Africa and Asia into the UK. And we have this problem of FGM, this female genital mutilation. The problem is, this is actually summer now, and most of these girls have traveled. By the time they come back, they are ready to be mutilated. And they don't do it, most of them do it in the UK, but it is not known. And I can still tell you that there's a law against this in the UK, but nobody has been persecuted yet, unlike in France. Now, the question is, I kept arguing, there was a time we were arguing, and I said, this is about culture. This is not about religion, because some people were arguing that this is about religion. I said, no, this is about culture, because both Christians and Muslims are doing it. I understand from the background I came from that there's there's MGM, which people are still arguing against at the moment, that maybe it should be stopped. That's about religion, actually, that comes from the Bible. But about FGM, I mean, this is not only about Christian and Muslim, but the argument is that most of the FGM being done is from the Muslim side. But I told them this is about culture. These people are coming in from a different country, from a different background entirely into the UK, and they are coming in with their culture. Most of them, like for instance, they can't change their food. They still go back to eat what they are used to. I have a friend, for instance, let me just give you, she lives in France with me, she cannot eat anything like fromage or whatever. She doesn't like cheese. She will always go for Nigerian food. I told her for years you've been there, she said that's her own way of life. I mean, that's her own culture. She chooses to stay like that. And in the terms of FGM, I told them, this is about culture. Until we're able to tackle this issue of culture, we cannot stop FGM. Even if we keep arresting people and putting them in behind the bars, this still could go on. And in my understanding, I think, like you said, understanding culture and where it's come from. But the question is, are we supposed to embrace the culture? Because the problem is, if you are coming to a new country, you have to understand that you have to adapt to that place. You have to be able to, to accept anything they tell you to do. It doesn't mean that you're going to leave behind your own culture. You still have to hold on to some of your own, but you have to understand that this place is saying no is no. That means understand that female genital mutilation is a crime because it's another form of violence against women and girls. But in this aspect, nothing has been done about concerning UK at the moment. Nobody has been arrested. No parent has been arrested or anybody has been arrested. And this is something that we should understand that until we tackle the culture in the UK, we cannot stop FGM. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. I don't know if you agree with what I just said, because that's the biggest problem at the moment.
The problem is I'm not an expert for mutilation, but it's evident mutilation should be prohibited. But that's a difficult. If I'm as a philosopher, if I'm forced to say something about that subject, what I would say would be trivial and not good enough for you. So it is difficult to defend something that seems to be evident for many people, for the majority of people, but that has got a symbolic value in certain societies, a religious, a cultural, and it is a matter of entering into discourses and into argumentation processes, trying to show that if you don't perform such acts, you are not violating religious identities. But the work would be a political work, not a conceptual work. So I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Juliana. I live here in Berlin, and my question is inspired by an article I read this morning about a family in Gaza where a father was forced to explain to his 3-year-old why their house was broken down, basically. And in like going through the conversation, the child answered like, so then we should go to the Israelis and tear their houses down too. Coming back to your lecture about like how kids adapt culture and how cultural change is moving forward, how would you see that in such conflict situations, how much becomes that part of the culture, and what can we actually do to prevent that this kind of events are becoming part of their culture and that the conflict doesn't like oversaturate?
That's a very difficult question. We have got at the Technical University a Center for Studies on Antisemitism, and there are mainly in this field two positions: to criticize a specific policy of Israel is not a Semitic, to be against the Jewish people, because many Jewish intellectuals, many Jewish people criticize that those policies too, and it is important to see that. So But on the other, there is a certain person who is quite prominent and who works for that center and who has said a person criticizing the policies of the state Israel is not political correct and should, you know. So I think what a philosopher could do would be simply to differentiate that a critique of a certain policy, of certain military strategies applied in certain situations, does not imply that one is against a specific ethnic group or a specific community. Yes.
Probably my point was rather to check, to understand how we can avoid this experience of the child being incorporated into their culture, into their reality, making sure that this is not the only way they see the world because it's so much of their reality.
Well, letting the child go in abroad and study in foreign universities, taking the child out
this
of
is
that.
quite theoretical, isn't it?
Yes.
Because they can't even leave Gaza, basically, yeah?
Yes.
Like it's not like even saying it's about the kids in Gaza or Israel because they both suffer, yeah?
Yes.
It's more from a conceptual point of view, preventing more violations in the future, because the fact is that hurt people hurt again. This is probably even the root of the whole conflict.
Yes.
So
well, I think there are two levels. I'm not competent for the theoretical level, but on the theoretical level.